I speak in the name of God, whoever creates, redeems, and brings new life. Amen. I confess I have mixed feelings about ANZAC Day. I think in some ways, like a lot of us, my identity was pretty much hewn in that sort of scenario. This week we had an advertisement from our local federal member come through my mailbox, and I looked at the picture and I thought, that's my dad. When I looked closer, it wasn't. But I sent it to my brother and sister anyway. But I also grew up in the era of the Vietnam War. My name was on the list to be called up, but I missed out. But other colleagues and friends did go, and it profoundly ruined their lives. Not to speak of the many others as well. So ANZAC Day must surely lead toward conversations that keep the abhorrence of war at the forefront of our minds, alongside our insistence on international rules of justice and human rights. If we're to encourage human flourishing, we must be willing to admit as nations and communities that we were wrong and we are sorry. I just so happened to be reading John Steinbeck's novel For Whom the Bell Tolls. I'd never read it, and I thought I'd better read this before the end comes. And it's a novel, as many of you may know, about the Spanish Civil War. But the main character, Robert Jordan, at one point, reflecting on this whole event, says, "In war, you always end up killing the people you do not want to kill. War diminishes our humanity, the moral capacity of people on all sides." I heard recently also a former member of the Viet Cong speaking about a battle in what they called the American War. And he was confronted on the battlefield by a dying American soldier crying for his mother and his family. I realised at that point, he said, that these Americans were human also. So today we hear about this good shepherd, the God with us. And the psalm we didn't read, but which we will sing later on, is Psalm 23. You could probably recite most of it to me. Psalm 23 would have been the psalm often recited by chaplains on battlefields and at gravesides on both sides of World War I and II, and probably since. "The Lord is my shepherd, therefore I lack nothing. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me." The psalm remains a favourite, and one I've often read at the bedside of many a dying or ill person. But having said that, neither this psalm nor the metaphor that Jesus is when he's spoken about as the gate of the sheep or the good shepherd will allow us to fall back into the pagan practice of thinking God is on our side and that others are expendable. By pagan practice, I refer to our human propensity to be dependent on a structure of we and they. And we get fired up about the rightness of we and the evil of they. And we've often done this also using the metaphor of the Good Shepherd. But contrary to this point of view, I'm going to draw out 2 points from today's reading and the little part that goes before it about Jesus as the gate. In verse 9, Jesus refers to himself. He says, "I am the gate. Whoever enters by me will be saved and will come and go out and find pasture." Now, gates or doors, as you realise, determine or define who's in and who's out. But in this instance, hear what Jesus says. It's Jesus' decision to start with about who's in and who's out. But here is a special sort of door, entered by our joining him in his death, so that we may have life and have it abundantly. That door, sacramentally, we refer to as baptism. So if we talk about being baptised, that's the inference behind it. We are not pagans in the sense that we are talking about us and them. We are Christian in terms of wanting to unite and draw the mob together. Through this gate, there is to be found extraordinary freedom here for us. And here is what we might say about this. The Good Shepherd enables people to go in and out and find pasture. It's a strange sort of door which does not seek to define people, but gives access to a temporary shelter which exists for the benefit of the sheep without wishing to confine the sheep within that shelter or yard or place. There is no definitive inside and outside for the Good Shepherd. That's what I'm talking about, pagan views coming into even the church. There's no definitive inside or outside for the Good Shepherd. There are only places of shelter and feeding, different places to which the door gives access and which presuppose movement, non-fixity, and confidence in being neither in or out. It's assumed that the best feeding place might not be one that seems to be in. Yet the Good Shepherd is able to make that outside place very much available to his sheep. There's no us and them. This is not a matter of God on our side, but God with us. But our message is also God with us and with our neighbour, and Jesus teaches with our enemy. The second point I want to draw on here from these metaphors of Jesus as gate and good shepherd is that it suggests he is in the midst of us creating human community, giving us freedom and enabling us to be community and part of the mob. So this for me is what the ANZAC spirit ought to be about, and us coming toward or moving towards this one mob. But I'm reminded also, not least of all by recent revelations, that Aboriginal soldiers were not even paid, and some of them, when they were paid, were underpaid and certainly not acknowledged. But I read that Ann Patel Gray, who is an Aboriginal writer, she writes about Aboriginal people experiencing the oppressive Jesus. And this is what I mean by the pagan view of picking up something and causing it to be us and them. But she says the so-called good news came through oppression and dispossession brought by church and government. But as she goes on to say, she wouldn't allow her people to sense and remain in this sense of spiritual oppression. She went on to write that while they did not find Jesus in the church where we experienced racism, she said, we found Jesus in our midst. Here's the Good Shepherd. Aboriginal Christians soon learnt that the Good Shepherd was not blonde and blue-eyed and European, but always present, the one they had always known. In Western Aranta language, they call this God Alt Yira. In the Hebrew scriptures, they call this God Yahweh, the one who is eternal, the uncreated one. The one who is calls us to community, calls humanity to community, calls us to be one mob. And this is the non-pagan Good Shepherd. Jesus at the gate, as the gate, and the Good Shepherd, is then the measure of our humanity, attending to his way, remembering, as we do, there is no longer us and them. That's the pagan way. Can we keep this at the heart of our remembering of Anzac Day?